Hi, so let's do 2 slides on the mouth and the esophagus. Relatively short. Okay, so we're talking about the digestive system in the mouth, and we can spend a little bit of time on the salivary glands. I mentioned in the earlier lecture that there are 3 sets. There's the parotid, which is the largest, and to outline it, it overlies the masseter. There's the parotid, right and left. The facial nerve, you might note and appreciate that it runs through the salivary gland. So here are the branches of the facial nerve. And they sort of fan out like the fingers of your hand running through it. So that's the parotid salivary gland. And the sublingual salivary glands shown in the lower slide are below the tongue. Let's go to red. So there are the sublingual and then the submandibular. Now these are all exocrine glands, of course, so they secrete their products. This is the parotid salivary gland. They all secrete their products through a series of ducts. And we're not going to name the different ducts. But the submandibular salivary gland you can palpate under the lower edge of the body of the mandible on the throat. It sometimes is confused with a lymph node, but it's a glandular nodule that is simply the submandibular salivary gland. As far as the saliva goes, it's approximately 1 to 1.5 liters a day of saliva that are produced. It's mostly water. And there is bicarbonate in that, acts as a buffer, and you know what bicarbonate looks like. And there's also lysozyme, which we've seen before when we talked about the immune system and non-specific barriers, non-specific defenses. It's bactericidal, which means it kills many types of bacteria, not all. Many bacteria are good bacteria, and they are adapted to living in your mouth, in your oral cavity, and that's good. It keeps out pathogenic bacteria. There is also salivary amylase, which starts the chemical digestion of starch. So starch digestion occurs both mechanically and chemically in the mouth. The chemical from the amylase. And there are no peptidases in the saliva. So chemical digestion of proteins begins in the stomach, not in the mouth. But you certainly grind up the protein in the mouth before swallowing it. So that's it for saliva and salivary glands. Note or two on the esophagus, which is a muscular tube. So over here in the figure, the esophagus is just this muscular tube. There are then a series of constrictor muscles as you move up past the pharynx into the pharynx region. I'm not asking you to remember the constrictor muscles, but they wrap around the esophagus and compress it. Acts as the upper esophageal sphincter, and it's a muscular tube. Begins at the where the glottis and the epiglottis separate the trachea from the esophagus. And what is interesting that as you descend, the muscle transitions from skeletal muscle to smooth muscle. So on the superior end of the esophagus, it's skeletal, it's voluntary. So assists with voluntary swallowing. And then as the esophagus gets closer to the stomach, it transitions into smooth muscle, which is involuntary. And from there on, it's all involuntary smooth muscle all the way to the end of the alimentary canal at the where there is a voluntary anal sphincter. Otherwise, the entire tube is now smooth muscle. So I believe that's it for this bit, and we'll move on.